They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I served mine in a helicopter at 30,000 feet, with a side of champagne and the sweetest taste of justice I'd ever known. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead like 1,000 mocking stars as I sat at table 7, the furthest from the bride and groom, naturally. The Hampton estate was everything you'd expect from old money: sprawling lawns that rolled down to the beach, white tents billowing in the ocean breeze, and enough champagne to drown a small village. I smoothed down my navy evening gown, the one I'd found at a consignment shop in Brooklyn, and tried to ignore the whispers that followed me like smoke. My mother, Caroline, sat beside me, her jaw tight with that familiar tension I'd known my entire life. The tension that said, please don't make a scene, please just survive this, please let us get through one family gathering without incident. Her fingers worried the edge of her napkin, twisting and untwisting the expensive linen until I thought it might tear. Aunt Eleanor held court at the head table, her diamonds catching the light every time she gestured, which was often. She loved an audience, and tonight she had the best one money could buy. 200 guests, half of whom had flown in from Europe, all there to watch her daughter Chloe marry some hedge fund manager whose name I'd already forgotten. The first barb came during the appetizer course. A delicate scallop thing that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Oh look, it's Victoria Hayes, Eleanor's voice carried across 3 tables, practiced and precise. She knew exactly how to project without seeming to shout. I heard you were coming. Such a surprise. I didn't realize they were serving a charity course tonight. Laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Polite, cultured laughter that cut deeper than any scream. I kept my fork steady, took another bite of the scallop. It tasted like ash in my mouth, but I smiled anyway. Chloe, resplendent in her Vera Wang gown, leaned over to whisper something to her new husband, then held up her hand to admire her engagement ring in the candlelight. The diamond was the size of a small country. She angled it deliberately in my direction, making sure I saw, making sure I knew what I would never have. My mother's hand found mine under the table, squeezing once. A warning, a plea. Eleanor wasn't finished. She never was. That dress, Victoria. Vintage, is it? How resourceful of you. She took a sip of her wine, eyes glittering with malice over the rim of her glass. Though I suppose when your father leaves you nothing but debt, one has to be creative. The table fell silent. Even the string quartet seemed to pause between notes. I could feel every eye on me, waiting. Waiting for me to cry, to run, to prove that I was exactly what they thought I was. A poor relation, a charity case, someone to be pitied and scorned in equal measure. Actually, Aunt Eleanor, I said, my voice steady and clear, I think you've become so accustomed to judging people by their bank accounts that you've forgotten what real value looks like. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, Victoria dear, it's so easy to talk about value when you have nothing. I bet you can't even afford the plane ticket home. That's when Marcus appeared. He materialized beside my chair like a shadow given form, 6 feet of pure professionalism in a tailored black suit, an earpiece glinting discreetly at his temple. His presence commanded immediate attention. Conversations died. Heads turned. Miss Hayes, he said, his voice low but carrying perfectly in the sudden silence. The helicopter is ready. We can depart whenever you're prepared. The clink of cutlery on china stopped. The whispers ceased. Even Eleanor's mouth fell open, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. I took my time finishing my champagne, savoring the moment as much as the vintage. When I set the glass down, it was with the careful precision of someone who had all the time in the world and knew it. Thank you, Marcus. Give me just a moment. I dabbed at my lips with my napkin, then stood. My dress swept the floor with a whisper of silk that suddenly sounded expensive, exclusive, untouchable. Eleanor had recovered enough to sputter. A helicopter? What kind of performance is this? I turned to face her fully. In the candlelight, I could see the confusion warring with disbelief on her face. This wasn't how this scene was supposed to play out. I was supposed to shrink, to apologize, to disappear into the night with my tail between my legs. I'm afraid I have an urgent meeting I cannot postpone, Aunt Eleanor. You'll forgive me for leaving your lovely celebration early. I picked up my clutch, felt the weight of my phone inside, the phone that contained the contracts, the agreements, the signatures that had cost me 3 years of sleepless nights and every ounce of pride I possessed. Oh, and about that plane ticket? I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite comfortable. In fact, I own the airline. The gasp that went through the tent was audible. Heads swiveled. Someone dropped a fork. Outside, the helicopter's rotors began to spin, a low thrumming that built to a roar, sending waves of sound rolling across the manicured lawn. The tent's sides billowed inward from the downdraft, making the chandeliers sway. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the temporary flooring, steady and sure. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting. Excited voices, shocked exclamations, my mother's sharp intake of breath. But it was my final words that I knew would haunt Eleanor through the long night ahead. I paused at the tent's entrance, one hand on the silk curtain, and looked back over my shoulder. One more thing, Aunt Eleanor. You mentioned my father's debts? I smiled. And I knew it didn't reach my eyes. You might want to check your husband's financial statements in the morning. I have a feeling you'll find some interesting developments. Turns out, I didn't inherit debt. I inherited something far more valuable. Knowledge. Then I was gone, striding across the grass toward the black helicopter that sat on the lawn like a sleeping dragon. Marcus held the door for me, and I climbed inside, the leather seats cool against my skin. As we lifted off, I looked down at the chaos below, the wedding guests spilling out of the tent, pointing up at us, the lights of the Hampton estate shrinking to tiny pinpricks. My mother, standing alone in the crowd, her hand pressed to her chest. For 3 years, I had dreamed of this moment. 3 years since my father's funeral, when Eleanor had stood in the parking lot of the church and told anyone who would listen that Thomas Hayes had died a failure, leaving his family with nothing but shame and creditors. 3 years since she'd laughed in my face when I said I would prove her wrong. 3 years of 18-hour days, of coffee for dinner, of apartments I could barely afford and clothes I bought secondhand. 3 years of building an empire in the shadows while they all assumed I was drowning. The helicopter banked east, toward Manhattan, where my real life waited, where Bennett Holdings occupied 3 floors of prime office space in a building I'd purchased 6 months ago, where my team was waiting for my signal to execute phase 2 of a plan that had been 3 years in the making. Marcus handed me a tablet, the screen already glowing with updates. Everything is proceeding as scheduled, Miss Hayes. The final signatures will be complete by 8 a.m. Brooks Realty will be officially transferred to Bennett Holdings. Vance won't know what hit him until the bank calls. I scrolled through the documents, my heart hammering despite my outward calm. Richard Vance, Eleanor's husband, the man who'd called me a gold digger at my own father's wake. The man who'd told me I'd never amount to anything because I didn't have the killer instinct for business. His company, his legacy, his pride and joy would belong to me by sunrise. Good, I said. Make sure every detail is perfect. I want this to be completely legal, completely public, and completely devastating. Marcus nodded. The press release is ready. We'll send it at 9 a.m. after the transfer is complete. The business journals will have it by their morning editions. Below us, New York City sparkled like a jewel box, all light and shadow and infinite possibility. I'd been born in this city, in a small apartment in Queens that my father had worked 3 jobs to afford. He died in this city too, in a hospital bed with machines beeping their final countdown, holding my hand and telling me that I had something special, that I shouldn't let them break me. They'll try to destroy you, he'd whispered, his voice barely audible over the ventilator. When they see what you can become, but you're stronger than all of them combined. You're my girl. I'd found the documents 2 weeks after his funeral, hidden in a safety deposit box I'd only discovered because of an overlooked bill. Papers showing that my father had been the silent partner in Brooks Realty, that he'd funded Richard's first 3 developments, that he was owed 50% of everything they'd built. Papers that Richard and Eleanor had conveniently lost after my father's death, assuming I was too grief-stricken and ignorant to ask questions. They'd assumed wrong. The helicopter touched down on the roof of my building at midnight. Marcus escorted me down to my penthouse office, where floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city that never slept. My team was waiting, laptops open, coffee cups scattered across the conference table like offerings to the god of capitalism. Status? I asked, shrugging off my coat. Jennifer, my chief legal counsel, looked up from her computer. All contracts are signed. The wire transfers will execute at 8 a.m. Eastern. Brooks Realty will be ours, lock, stock, and every piece of property they own. Vance's personal assets are separate, but the company is finished. His loans? I sat down at the head of the table, accepting a cup of coffee from Marcus. All due within 90 days, Jennifer said, and all held by banks we have excellent relationships with. If you want to call them in immediately, we can make that happen. I stared into my coffee, watching the steam curl up toward the recessed lights. This was the moment. The moment where I could destroy them completely, reduce Eleanor and Richard to the poverty they'd always mocked in others. The moment where I could prove I was everything they'd said I wasn't. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. What have you done? I set it face down on the table without responding. Miss Hayes? Jennifer's voice was gentle. Your instructions? 3 years of rage, of humiliation, of nights spent crying in studio apartments that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. 3 years of being called worthless, pathetic, a leech on society. 3 years of whispers at family gatherings, of invitations conveniently lost in the mail, of Christmas cards that arrived late if they arrived at all. Call in the loans, I said. All of them. By Monday, I want Brooks Realty to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Bennett Holdings. Vance can stay on as a consultant if he wants, at a significantly reduced salary. Eleanor, I paused. Eleanor has no official position in the company, correct? Correct. She's just his wife. Then she gets nothing. The words tasted bitter, but I forced them out anyway. Make it very clear that her presence is not welcome in any Bennett Holdings facility." My team exchanged glances, but no one argued. They'd all heard the stories. They knew what Eleanor had done to me, had said about me. They understood this wasn't just business. This was war. By 7 a.m., I was still in my office, watching the sun rise over the East River. I hadn't slept. I'd showered and changed into a fresh suit, black Armani with a silk blouse the color of blood, but sleep had been impossible. My mind kept replaying the look on Eleanor's face when I'd walked out of that wedding tent, the sound of the helicopter drowning out whatever protests she might have made. Marcus appeared with fresh coffee and a stack of newspapers. "It's done," he said. "The transfers are complete. Brooks Realty is yours. The press releases have been sent. By 9 a.m., it will be on every business news site in the country." I picked up the Wall Street Journal, saw the headline already loading on their website: "Mystery Mogul Executes Stunning Overnight Takeover of Brooks Realty." My phone started ringing at 8:30. First my mother, then numbers I didn't recognize, then my mother again. I ignored them all. Instead, I had Marcus drive me to the Brooks Realty headquarters in Midtown, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that my father had helped finance 20 years ago. Security was expecting me. They'd been informed of the change in ownership at 8 a.m. sharp. They escorted me to the executive floor, where Richard Vance's name was still on the door, though not for much longer. I walked into what had been his office, running my fingers along the mahogany desk, the leather chair that probably cost as much as a used car. The view was spectacular, looking south toward the financial district. This was what success looked like to people like Richard and Eleanor. Corner office, 6-figure salary, the ability to look down on everyone else. I was standing at the window when Richard burst through the door. He'd aged in the 3 years since my father's funeral. More gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. But the fury in his expression was exactly the same as I remembered from that terrible day when he'd told me I'd never be half the business person my father was. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He didn't shout, not quite, but his voice shook with rage. "You can't just walk in here and take my company." I turned slowly, letting him see the calm in my eyes. But I did. "The paperwork is all filed with the state. The transfers are complete. Brooks Realty is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Bennett Holdings, which means, Mr. Vance, that you work for me." His face went from red to purple. "This is theft. I'll sue you for everything you have." "With what money?" I sat down in his chair, felt how it molded to fit my body perfectly. "Your operating capital is frozen pending review of all contracts and expenditures. Your personal line of credit has been called in by the bank. And your assets, well, they're mostly tied up in company stock, which I now control." I smiled at him. "You're welcome to sue, of course, but I'd suggest you save your money. You're going to need it." "I'll destroy you," he hissed. "You think you can just waltz in here with your dead father's money and take what I built?" "What you built?" I stood up, leaned forward with my hands on the desk. "My father funded your first 3 developments. My father's name was on the original partnership agreement. My father's money bought this building, and when he died, you and Eleanor buried every piece of evidence of his involvement and told me I was lucky to get his pocket change." Richard's jaw worked, but no sound came out. "You want to talk about theft, Mr. Vance? Let's talk about how you stole from your partner's grieving daughter. Let's talk about how you forged documents to cut me out of what was rightfully mine. Or better yet, let's talk about how you're going to explain to your wife that the empire she's been lording over people with no longer exists." The door burst open again. Eleanor rushed in, her Chanel suit rumpled, her makeup hastily applied. She froze when she saw me sitting in Richard's chair. "No," she whispered. "This isn't possible." "Hello, Aunt Eleanor." I gestured to the chairs opposite the desk. "Please, sit down. We have so much to discuss." She stumbled forward, fell more than sat in one of the chairs. Richard remained standing, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This is insane," Eleanor said. "You can't do this to us. We're family." "Family?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Is that what we are? Because I don't recall family treating each other the way you've treated me. I don't recall family standing at funerals and telling the whole world that the deceased was worthless. I don't recall family laughing when someone loses everything." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing, no sympathy, no regret, just a cold, hollow satisfaction. "I was jealous," she said suddenly, "of you, of Thomas. Everyone loved him. Everyone respected him. And you inherited that. People liked you even when you had nothing, even when you showed up in secondhand clothes and worked 2 jobs just to make rent. You had something I never could." "Jealousy is not an excuse for cruelty," I said. She fumbled in her purse, pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. "When your father died, I found this, at the hospital. It was addressed to you." Her hand shook as she slid it across the desk. "I kept it. I told myself I was protecting you from false hopes, but really I was just being spiteful." I picked up the envelope, Recognized my father's handwriting immediately. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm, stay controlled. I couldn't break down now. Not in front of them. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully. My father's last letter to me. My dearest Victoria, it read. If you're reading this, then I couldn't say these words to you in person. And for that, I'm deeply sorry. You have always been the brightest light in my life, the one thing I know I did absolutely right. You have a strength that terrifies people like Eleanor and Richard, because it doesn't come from money or power. It comes from your heart. Don't let them convince you that kindness is weakness. Don't let them tell you that you need to become hard to survive. Build your empire, my love, but never lose yourself in the process. The world has enough ruthless people. What it needs is someone who can be both strong and compassionate. I know you can be that person. I've always known. All my love, always and forever. Dad. The words blurred on the page. I blinked hard, forced the tears back. Not now. Not here. When I looked up, Eleanor was sobbing quietly, her face in her hands. Richard looked defeated, hollowed out. Get out, I said softly. What? Richard's head snapped up. Get out of this office. Both of you. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. You'll receive severance packages according to your contracts, but your access to all Bennett Holdings properties is revoked as of this moment. Victoria, please, Eleanor begged. Don't do this. We'll lose everything. You should have thought of that before you spent 3 years making my life hell. I pressed the intercom button on the desk. Security? Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Vance from the building. They are no longer employed here. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway within seconds. They must have been waiting in the hall. As Richard and Eleanor were led away, Eleanor turned back one last time. I'm sorry, she said. I truly am. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. I said nothing. Just watched as they disappeared down the hall. The moment they were gone, I collapsed back into the chair, my father's letter still clutched in my hand. The victory felt hollow, empty. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph, the sweetest revenge imaginable. But all I felt was tired. My phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mom, what have you done? Her voice was shrill with panic. Eleanor called me. She's hysterical. She says you've ruined them. Yes, I said. I have. Victoria, this is too much. They're family. You can't destroy family like this. Something inside me snapped. Where were you? The words came out raw, unfiltered. Where were you all those times Eleanor humiliated me at family dinners? Where were you when Richard told me I was worthless? Where were you when I needed someone to stand up for me? Silence. You were there, Mom. You were sitting right next to me, and you never said a word. You just let it happen because you were too afraid of making waves, of losing your place in the family hierarchy. You chose them over me, every single time. That's not fair, she whispered. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nothing about this has been fair, but I'm done being the one who suffers for everyone else's comfort. I hung up before she could respond. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, interviews, and hostile negotiations. The business press couldn't get enough of the story. Young woman rises from nothing to overthrow established real estate empire in single night. I became a reluctant celebrity, my face plastered across Forbes and Fortune and Bloomberg Businessweek. Eleanor tried to contact me 17 times. Richard sent legal letters threatening everything from fraud charges to defamation. I ignored them all, let my lawyers handle the noise. Bennett Holdings thrived under my leadership. I promoted the people who had been overlooked for years, the ones who actually did the work while Richard took credit. Morale skyrocketed. Profits followed, but I couldn't shake the emptiness. The anger that had fueled me for 3 years was gone, burned away in the moment of victory, leaving nothing but ash behind. It was my assistant, David, who finally cornered me one evening when I was working late. Again. Boss, can I speak freely? He stood in the doorway of my office, his tie loosened, his expression concerned. When have you not spoken freely? I didn't look up from my laptop. You're miserable. That got my attention. Excuse me? He came into the office, sat down across from me. You've achieved everything you set out to do. You've proved everyone wrong. You've built an empire. And you look like you haven't smiled in a month. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're here until midnight every night. You never take weekends off. You don't see friends. You don't date. You don't do anything except work. This isn't living, Victoria. This is just existing with better furniture. I wanted to argue, but the words died in my throat. He was right. I'd been so focused on revenge, on proving my worth, that I'd forgotten what I was actually working toward. What am I supposed to do? I asked quietly. I've spent 3 years planning this. Now it's over. What comes next? That's for you to figure out, David said gently. But maybe start by asking yourself what your father would want you to do. After he left, I sat alone in my office, my father's letter spread out on my desk. I'd read it so many times I had it memorized, but I read it again anyway, focusing on the parts I'd tried to ignore. Build your empire, my love, but never lose yourself in the process. I'd built the empire. But had I lost myself? The woman I used to be, the one who volunteered at soup kitchens and sang in the church choir and believed in second chances. Where was she? Had I sacrificed her on the altar of revenge? The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting. My executives filed in, expecting another acquisition announcement or strategic initiative. Instead, I told them about Eleanor and Richard, about the real story behind the takeover, about my father's letter. I called you all here because I'm making some changes, I said. Effective immediately, Brooks Realty will be restructured as a community-focused development company. We're going to build affordable housing. We're going to invest in neighborhoods that have been ignored by people like Richard Vance. We're going to do what my father always wanted to do. Jennifer raised her hand tentatively. What about profits? We'll still make money, I assured her. But we're going to make it ethically. We're going to make it in a way that helps people instead of exploiting them. And anyone who has a problem with that can leave now. No one moved. Good, I said. Then let's get to work. The announcement hit the press 2 days later. Bennett Holdings CEO Victoria Hayes pivots to affordable housing focus. The reactions were mixed. Some praised the move as visionary. Others called it financial suicide. I didn't care about either opinion. What I cared about was the email I received a week later. Dear Miss Hayes, my name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a single mother of 2 working 3 jobs to make rent in Queens. I just heard about your new housing initiative, and I wanted to say thank you. People like me don't usually get second chances. We work hard, but we're invisible to companies like yours. The fact that you're trying to change that means more than you could possibly know. Thank you for seeing us. Sincerely, Sarah Chen. I read that email 5 times, then printed it out and pinned it to the wall behind my desk. 3 months after the takeover, my mother finally showed up at my office unannounced. David tried to intercept her, but I waved him off. She stood in my doorway looking smaller than I remembered, older. Her hair had more gray in it. There were new lines around her mouth. I came to apologize, she said without preamble, not just for the wedding, but for everything. For every time I should have defended you and didn't. For choosing comfort over courage. For failing you when you needed me most. I gestured to the chair. Eleanor gave an interview yesterday, she continued, to some lifestyle magazine. She talked about how jealousy destroyed her relationship with you, how she realized too late that she'd valued the wrong things. It was surprisingly honest. I saw it, I said. I had seen it. Eleanor's face, older and sadder, talking about the price of cruelty. It hadn't given me the satisfaction I'd expected. She's selling the house, my mother said. They're downsizing. Richard took a job with a smaller firm. They're not destitute, but they're not what they were. Good, I said, but the word felt hollow. My mother reached across the desk, took my hand. You were right to be angry with me. I was a coward. I thought keeping the peace was the same as being strong, but really I was just afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of losing what little status I had. I should have fought for you. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. For the first time in 3 years, I let myself cry in front of her. Great, heaving sobs that shook my whole body, releasing all the pain and anger and loneliness I'd been carrying. She came around the desk and held me the way she should have held me at that funeral 3 years ago, the way she should have held me every time Eleanor said something cruel. I love you, she whispered into my hair. I should have said it more. I should have shown it better. But I love you, and I'm so proud of who you've become. When I finally composed myself, I pulled back and looked at her. I need you to understand something. I can't go back to the way things were. I can't pretend everything is fine and show up to family dinners where Eleanor and Richard are welcomed like nothing happened. I know, she said, and I wouldn't ask you to. Eleanor and Richard aren't invited to my house anymore. I've made it clear to everyone in the family where I stand. It cost me some relationships, but it was worth it. You're my daughter. That matters more than anything else. It wasn't a complete healing. Broken things don't go back to exactly what they were, but it was a start, a foundation we could build on. 4 months after the takeover, I held a press conference at the newly renovated Brooks Community Development Center in Queens. The location was deliberate. This was where my father had grown up, where he'd learned the value of hard work and community. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Eleanor was there too. I'd seen her slip in the back, trying to be inconspicuous. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a small nod. Not quite forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady and clear. Many of you know my story, how I built Bennett Holdings, how I took control of Brooks Realty in a single night. The press has called me a lot of things. A shark, a genius, a ruthless businesswoman. But I'm here today to tell you a different story. I took a breath, felt the weight of my father's letter in my jacket pocket. I'm here to talk about what happens after revenge. Because revenge is easy. Revenge is satisfying. It feels good to win, to prove everyone wrong, to show that you're stronger than anyone thought. But revenge doesn't heal anything. It doesn't fill the empty places inside you. It doesn't make you whole. The room was silent, every eye on me. 3 years ago, my Aunt Eleanor told me I was worthless, that I would never amount to anything, that my father died a failure and left me nothing but shame. And I believed her, for a while. I believed that my value was measured in dollars and square footage and corner offices, so I set out to prove her wrong. I worked myself into the ground, building an empire just to shove it in her face. And when I finally did that, when I had everything I thought I wanted, I realized something. I'd become exactly what I hated. I saw Eleanor's hand go to her mouth, so today, I'm announcing several changes. First, Bennett Holdings is establishing a $50 million fund for affordable housing development in underserved communities. Second, we're launching a mentorship program for young people who want to enter real estate but don't have the traditional connections or capital. And third, I'm inviting Eleanor Brooks Vance to join our advisory board. The room erupted, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Eleanor stood up in the back, tears streaming down her face. I held up my hand for silence. Let me be clear. This is not about forgiveness. Eleanor doesn't deserve my forgiveness, and I'm not in a position to give it yet. This is about something bigger. This is about breaking cycles. This is about choosing to be better than the worst things people have done to us. My father taught me that kindness isn't weakness. He taught me that real strength comes from helping others rise, not from crushing your enemies. I forgot that for a while, but I'm remembering now. After the press conference, Eleanor approached me slowly, hesitantly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't deserve this opportunity, but I promise I won't waste it." "See that you don't," I replied. Then, softer, "I meant what I said. I'm not ready to forgive you, but I am ready to move forward, for my father's sake, if nothing else." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "He would be so proud of you. Thomas would be so incredibly proud." As she walked away, I felt something shift inside me. The rage that had driven me for so long, the burning need to prove myself, it was finally starting to cool. Not disappearing entirely, but transforming into something else. Something that felt almost like peace. Marcus found me later that evening on the roof of my building, watching the sun set over the city. "Where to now, Miss Hayes?" he asked, ever professional even in casual moments. "Home," I said. "I think it's time I actually went home for once." Then I paused. "But take the long route. I want to see the city." The car wound through Manhattan, past the gleaming towers of Midtown and the bustling streets of Hell's Kitchen, through the tree-lined blocks of the Upper West Side, and down toward the Village. I watched it all go by, this city that had broken me and remade me, that had been my battlefield and my proving ground. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. "The Washington Post wants an interview. Should I set it up?" I thought about it for a moment, then typed back, "Tell them I'm taking a vacation. First one in 3 years. They can wait." Another text came through. This one from David. "Proud of you, boss. Your dad would be too." I smiled, felt the unfamiliar stretch of joy in my expression. When was the last time I'd smiled like this? Really smiled, not the practiced expression I wore for cameras and board meetings. As we crossed the Queensboro Bridge, I looked back at Manhattan, all lit up in the gathering dark. From here, you couldn't see the individual buildings, couldn't distinguish between the banks and the brownstones, the penthouses and the projects. It was just light and shadow, a million stories layered on top of each other, a million people trying to survive and thrive and matter. I'd wanted them to remember me as the woman who came back from nothing, who crushed her enemies, who built an empire out of spite and rage. But sitting there in the back of the car, my father's letter in my pocket and the city lights reflected in the windows, I realized that's not what I wanted at all. I wanted to be remembered as the woman who learned that revenge was empty unless it led to something better, the woman who had the power to destroy but chose instead to build, the woman who rose from the ashes not to burn others, but to light the way. They called me the Phoenix, and maybe that was right, but not because I'd burned everything down. Because I'd learned that the real strength, the real power, comes from transformation, from taking the pain and the anger and the hurt and transmuting it into something that helps instead of harms. 6 months after that press conference, I stood in the lobby of the first affordable housing complex built by the new Brooks Community Development Initiative. 100 families had moved in over the past month, including Sarah Chen, the woman who'd sent me that email. Her daughters were playing in the new playground out back, their laughter floating through the open windows. Eleanor was there too, working with the community outreach team, listening to residents' concerns and ideas. She'd thrown herself into the work with surprising dedication, as if trying to atone for years of contempt through action. We weren't friends. We might never be friends. But we were learning to work together towards something that mattered more than our personal history. My mother arrived with coffee and pastries, making the rounds with the kind of warmth she'd always possessed but had hidden for too long. She hugged children, chatted with their parents, made everyone feel seen and valued. This was who she'd always been underneath the anxiety and the need to please. I was glad she'd found her way back to herself. As I watched it all, I thought about the woman I'd been on that helicopter 3 years ago, flying away from Eleanor's mocking laughter with nothing but rage and determination to fuel me. That woman had been powerful in her way, but she'd been incomplete. She'd been defined entirely by her pain, by what had been done to her. This woman, the one standing here now, was something different. She was defined by what she chose to do with that pain, how she chose to transform it. My phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Miss Hayes, this is Daniel Martinez. I'm calling from the mayor's office. We'd like to discuss expanding your affordable housing initiative citywide with municipal support. I looked around the lobby, at the families making this place their home, at Eleanor helping an elderly resident fill out paperwork, at my mother laughing with a group of children. At the life blooming in spaces that had once held only emptiness. I'd be happy to discuss it, I said, but it will have to wait until Monday. I'm taking the weekend off. After I hung up, Marcus appeared at my elbow with his usual impeccable timing. Ready to go, Miss Hayes? Almost, I said. One more minute. I pulled out my father's letter one last time, read the words that had guided me through the darkness and back into the light. Build your empire, my love, but never lose yourself in the process. I hadn't lost myself. I'd found myself. Not in the revenge or the victory or the empire building, but in the quiet moments after. In the choice to be kind when cruelty would have been easier. In the decision to build up instead of tear down. In the realization that the strongest people aren't the ones who never break, but the ones who break, and then carefully, deliberately, put themselves back together in a better shape than before. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my pocket, next to my heart. As I walked out into the spring sunshine, I thought about how the story would end. Not with me standing victorious over my fallen enemies, not with Eleanor and Richard destroyed and broken, not even with reconciliation and forgiveness, though maybe those would come in time. No, the story ended here, in this moment, with me choosing peace over pride, choosing compassion over conquest, choosing to be the woman my father always believed I could be. They called me the Phoenix, because I rose from the ashes. But the real fire, the real transformation, wasn't in the destruction. It was in what came after, in building something beautiful from the ruins, in learning that you don't have to burn others to prove you survived the flames. I'd spent 3 years becoming powerful. Now I was spending every day learning to be good. And somehow, that was so much harder and so much more rewarding than revenge had ever been. Marcus held the car door open. I slid into the back seat, watched the building disappear behind us as we drove away. Where to now? Marcus asked. I smiled, feeling the warmth of it spread through my chest. Surprise me. And for the first time in 3 years, I had absolutely no plan, no strategy, no calculated next move. Just the road ahead and the possibility of choosing, every single day, to be something more than what pain had tried to make me. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I'd learned something better. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, the kind you have to work for and earn and grow into, that's a dish that actually nourishes, that actually heals. I wasn't there yet, maybe I'd never fully get there, but I was trying. And in the trying, in the daily choice to be better than my worst impulses, I'd found something that victory had never given me. I'd found peace. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge of all.